is a small country with 3.4 million inhabitants and high levels of human development. It's the most stable democracy of Latin America and one of the few full democracies of the world. However, some clouds are emerging in the horizon. The country has the highest imprisonment rate in South America and a high rate of homicides. Besides that, and despite the good institutional quality, there is a persistent gender gap. According to the Gender Gap Index, by 2023, women were 85% less likely to have the same opportunities for political participation than men. On October 27th, Uruguay conducted elections. As expected, Yamandú Orsi, the candidate of the center-left broad front, el Frente Amplio, received 44% of the votes, far from the second, the candidate of the current president, Luis Lacalle Pou, who got 27%. However, there will be a second round because none of the candidates received more than 50% of the votes required by the law. This will take place on November 24th, and there is uncertainty on the results, because in 2019, almost all the center-right and right-wing parties allied in coalition against the broad front. It could happen again. To know more about this election and the state of democracy in Uruguay, in this episode of Who is Voting in 2024, we are with David Allman, professor at the Catholic University of Chile and director of the Latin American chapter of the Varieties of Democracy project, known as VDEM, and with Camila Ceballos, political scientist and historian, researcher at the University of the Republic in Uruguay. Welcome, Camila, David.
Hello, how are you?
Hi.
Far from what seems to be a tendency in the world and several neighborhood countries, partisan politics look quite stable in Uruguay. There are new parties, but the two most traditional, National and Colorado, founded in the 19th century, and the one created after the transition to democracy, the Broad Front, are the most relevant in the electoral system. David, how do you see this? How do you read the main results of this election?
Small detail, the Broad Front was created before the dictatorship government. It's from 1971. So it has about 50-something years, which it's quite a consolidated political party. I see basically what you just said. It's a quite stable political system that reasonably absorbs potential shocks that we see around in the neighborhood, that they are not that present in Uruguay. So basically, our politics as usual, a la Uruguayan, let's say. And not in vain, we can point out a BBC article that came out last week that said that Uruguayan elections are the most boring elections in the world this year. And that's something to be happy and to be proud of, right? Yeah, the Uruguayan elections are not that exciting for those people who are not involved in the elections or citizens of Uruguay. There's nothing really drastic going on. So I guess there are good news. No news, good news.
No news, good news. But Camila, during the campaign, the media spoke about Uruguayan Milei, Andrés Ojeda, from the Colorado party. In 2019, a radical right party, Cabildo Abierto, entered in the parliament and supported the government of Lacalle Pou. Now, Ojeda received 16% of the votes, not enough to enter the ballotage. What does the 2024 election say about the radical right in Uruguay? Is there a challenge, or as David said, we can't be afraid of what would happen in the future?
No, I think that we have to talk about two notes about the campaign in general, and then we talk about Andrés Ojeda and Cabildo Abierto. First, our electoral cycle is very long. It began in June with primaries or internal election of political party. There, the party defined their candidate for the competition for the president of the republic. These are mandatory instances for the political party, but not for citizens. Thus, the political party have been in an electoral campaign since February, March. So it's very tight for that. And the electoral cycle will culminate next year with the election for mayor of 19 provinces, state, departmental government in Uruguay. So it's very long for us. I would be conceptually dangerous to think Ojeda as a Uruguayan Milei. However, I would also be incorrect to overlook the gesture of Ojeda has made toward figures like Javier Milei and Nayib Bukele. They talk about them, but I think with some, I don't know, one aspect that cannot be ignored is that Uruguay absorbs phenomena. The political party absorb that kind of phenomenon in that kind of way that is very lazy, okay? Ojeda's leads perform worse than the candidate expectation that you say, and Cabildo Abierto. So I think that we are in a good moment, but we have to pay attention to that kind of movement or discourses.
Thank you, Camila. So we stay with the Uruguay as a boring country, and maybe we can jump on the comparison with another country which is associated with boringness also, Switzerland. David, some years ago, you published an article in the Swiss Political Science Review where you explained how and to what extent the Uruguayan system of direct democracy was influenced by the Swiss system. Could you tell us the main similarities and differences between the two countries, and also which role does direct democracy play in Uruguay?
Uruguay emulated several institutions imported from Switzerland. To start with, the one that you just mentioned, which is direct democracy. But not only that, Uruguayans also emulated the collegial government during big part of the 20th century. Actually, you cannot really understand or grasp into depth the Uruguayan political system without paying attention to the discussions surrounding the collegial government, right? Since the beginning of the 20th century, José Bachir Ordóñez was obsessed during when he finished his first presidency and he couldn't get reelected. He went to Switzerland and he was in shock, astonished with the Swiss electoral system, with the Swiss governing system, and of course with direct democracy. So somehow Uruguay imported these both important institutions without the third one, which is the holy cow in Switzerland, which is federalism, right? Decentralization. That in Uruguay didn't happen. So Uruguay imported two of the three most important Swiss institutions, at least for the Swiss people. And since we can say the mid of the 20th century, Uruguay has been using these institutions in a quite frequent manner, particularly direct democracy. And direct democracy is much more a rediscovery made by Uruguayans after the coup d'etat. Despite the fact that every constitutional reform since 1917 in Uruguay had to be approved by citizens and was approved by citizens, the very use of citizen-initiated mechanisms of direct democracy, popular initiatives, or referendums against recently approved laws got their stamina after the collapse of the military regime. So it is with democratization, 1985, that Uruguay again starts to use these institutions, and we left the collegial government in the last reform, not the last one reform, but the reform before the coup d'etat in 1973, which was the electoral reform, the constitutional reform of 1967.
Yeah, so maybe not with the intensity we observe in Switzerland, but in Uruguay also direct democracy plays a prominent role. And as you said, there are an interesting exchange or inspiration from Uruguay and Switzerland. But Camila, this weekend, together with the election, the voters had to decide on two plebiscites about eliminating the pension funds promoted by the labor unions and allowing the night raids promoted by members of the right-wing parties. Both were defeated. What do these events tell us about the functioning of the mechanisms of direct democracy in Uruguay?
Well, as you say, yesterday, two mechanisms of direct democracy were put into the citizenship consideration, and they failed. In the first place, we can say that neither of the two initiatives has a chance of succeeding because they failed to build a broader coalition base beyond their proposing actors. It was high probably that it would happen. History confirmed this maxim, which has marked the trajectory of the plebiscites presented during presidential and parliamentary election, where public attention is focused on this issue. So it's very difficult, this kind of mechanisms, to have success when they are in the same scene than a president election and parliament election. So making space for informed debate and was practically impossible. So I think they are good mechanism, but using in the wrong way. I think that we have to discuss more and in another way how to improve that kind of mechanism for next steps.
What do you think, David, about the exit? How is your understanding of what happened in the plebiscite?
I mean, one of the problems that we have with popular initiatives in Uruguay is that we do not have no ballots. We only have yes ballots. Right? And this is a very complicated aspect because political parties have no incentives basically to make a broad coalition to support a popular initiative. And in case they are really against that intended change or modification of the constitution, they don't have much leverage on how to signal their voters what to do. Right? Because there is no ballot. I want to just make a parenthesis because we are talking about night raids, but with the judge law. It's not that the police enters a house without a judge or all the guarantees. Probably Uruguay is one of the very few countries in the world where the police cannot get into a house. Even the police knows that there is a crime going on at that time, for instance, trafficking or whatever other crime you can imagine, the state cannot enter that house. So what Uruguayans wanted to do is not the right wing, it's the official coalition. You can say is center-right coalition, it is the governing coalition in Uruguay, but it's not something that came from the right wing. When we are looking at the right wing in Uruguay, I wouldn't point Ojeda, I would point Sashi. The candidate got elected, which is, in Spanish we say terraplanista, flatlander, anti-vaxxer, anti-system, extreme nationalist, and this guy got 2 votes. A guy that came from the beginning, his early years, he was in the Frente Amplio, and he crossed all the spectrum, right? And that's the dangers that we are facing in Uruguay because nobody knows what this guy is gonna do. Even himself has no idea.
So this brings me to the last question. The Varieties of Democracy report on the global state of democracy has slightly downgraded the punctuation of Uruguay, which is considered a full democracy in recent years. David, how do you understand these trends for the country? Are there specific warnings? For instance, polarization, a challenge for Uruguayan politics?
No, I would say that the downgrading of the score of Uruguay, it's basically the same that the downgrade of scores of all democracies in the world. Uruguay has that, yes, if you see the scores in Uruguay, they're a little bit lower than last year, but still there are not any statistical significance in the difference, right? The quality of Uruguay, the quality of democracy in Uruguay remains quite high. Usually Uruguay, in virtually every dimension of the varieties of democracy, comes together with Costa Rica and Chile, the famous triad, right? Uruguay, Costa Rica, and Chile, always they are up there in comparison with Nicaragua, Venezuela, and other countries in Latin America. You have stable teams in the continent. So no, I wouldn't say that polarization has increased in Uruguay. To the contrary, I would say that polarization has diminished in Uruguay to the point that even for Uruguayans, this election was absolutely boring because discussion was quite shallow. There were no exotic or really drastic topics that divide the country, no whatsoever. The only thing that more or less came a little bit close to that was the plebiscite on the social security, right? The popular initiative on reforming the social security system. But even that was not that polarized. So no, I wouldn't say that polarization in Uruguay is suffering from drastic polarization or anything like that.
Yeah, what is interesting is that contrary to other systems, the Uruguayan system is polarized on ideological terms. So it's affective polarization, which is defined as a negative form of polarization, which is not so present in the country. So, Camila, how do you assess the state of democracy in Uruguay, and which are like the main issues? For instance, criminality, as far as I know, is one of the hot topics now for the Uruguayan citizenship.
Yes, I agree with David. I think our democracy is very good health. Boring also. However, we need to discuss in a better way how our democracy agreements are built every day. And we need to talk more about democracy because we are talking more about political parties and less about democracy. And I think we need to talk more about democracy in a heavy way. And we have to discuss about how our democracy and our party system care about like Sasha, because this guy will be in our Congress and we have to look for him. So I think we need to talk more about that. And I think we need to be menos complaciente, how can I say in English, con nosotros mismos. I think that we have this idea that excepcionalismo uruguayo is a bad idea for us.
Uruguayan exceptionalism is maybe a bad idea for Uruguayans, but after listening what you have told us today, the feeling is that it is exceptional. Of course, as you said, there are some challenges, some risks, but it's a stable democracy in the region and in the world.
Yeah,
no questions asked. It's boring even for those who look at us and it's a boring country, which is, again, it's a good thing in comparative terms, but still there are a lot of problems in Uruguay that they had to be addressed and they have to be faced in the next no matter who governs.
We are problems about inequality, for example, and we have to address it.
Sure. Child poverty.
Yeah. Crime, drugs. Yeah, we have heavy problems, real problems.
Yeah, some of these problems, like criminal governance, I think is a regional and world problem. But anyway, Camila, David, thanks a lot for taking the time to speak with us today in this episode of Who is Voting in 2024, Uruguay, the Switzerland of Latin America. Thanks again.
No, thank you.
Thank you for having us.